Sterling Hopkins, Toni Morrison, Zora Neale Hurston, Josefina Ferreras, Breonna Taylor, Gail Scott Heron, Ethel Carmen Johnson, Agadas Hasare, Paulie Marshall, Pat Parker, Audre Lorde, June Jordan, B. West, Aura Fajardo, James Baldwin, Aura Fajardo, Whitney Houston, Ahmaud Arbery, Rodney Young, Luis Mercedes, Dorothy Hampton, Sean Reed, Margaret Walker, Pedro Pietri, Ella Fitzgerald, Mina Alexander. Thank you, everyone, for saying the names out loud and for sharing them with us in the chat box. We'll hold this moment for all of you. Great, thank you. So that's how we start off book club. We start off in reflection. We start off, taking time for ourselves to ground ourselves. Usually folks are like running off the train and like making it just in time. But, it's important to take these moments for ourselves all the time. And I say that because as someone who doesn't take that time too often, this helps me also, become accountable to all of you in this moment as we hold space together. So now is the conversation. So like Ron was saying earlier, folks can just literally like popcorn style, you don't have to raise your hand if you don't want to. Like I'm gonna look at who's raising their hand, but really it's up to you. You unmute yourself. We can start wherever you guys can like. I believe for this week, we were supposed to read up to chapter 2.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Introduction, chapter 1 and 2.
Got it. Okay. So in this section of the book, you can feel free to refer to page numbers, refer to lines. If you want to read a line that really stopped you and was like, whoa, what was she saying when it came to that, etc. Your own experiences about love, if you'd like to share. If you feel like you differed in some of her analysis, you can share that too. You can comment on other bell hooks works that you may be reminded of or other works that you've read. Earlier in the chat, I sent a link to a video where Bell Hooks is literally talking about this book at like a book tour. She was in a library in Harlem. And it's a link that you can watch. It's like an hour and change long. Depending on how conversation goes, I may share my screen and play a little bit of it. But we really want to hear from you all what you thought.
I'll start. I really liked how she just approaches the idea of love in this book, and how she goes on about how it's necessary to have a shared definition. And and I think that's super necessary because people have different ideas of what love should look like, about how to manifest love. Everybody has like their different love languages and all that stuff, but I think having a shared understanding of what love should look like, how it should be exercised, seeing love as a verb, and how we should treat each other to be more loving, I think that would help us just have a mutual understanding for each other, to be more compassionate towards each other, and to be more loving. And on page 14 at the end of chapter 1, she says that definitions are vital starting points for the imagination. What we cannot imagine cannot come into being. A good definition marks our starting point and lets us know where we want to end up. And so in that, like she says, we need a map, and we need a map to guide us on our journey to love. So I think for, if everyone had like a shared definition of what love is, it would help us to be able to love and relate to each other a lot better. So I just really enjoyed reading that and her approach in that way.
Yeah, hi everyone. Good evening. I'm new to the book club. Thank you for welcoming me in that beautiful introduction and reflection. So, I want to echo what was just stated about love. I think reading the introduction really set the tone for the expectation for this book for me. Especially in the introduction where it does talk about um, how we assume what love is and how it's instinctive, right? And when I read that, um, there was so many moments that I reflected on, even after as a mom giving birth, right? Who went through postpartum and that difficulty as a woman, where I didn't feel the instinctive love because I had to find love in this way. Um, I'm finding the way that she's describing love, the way that she's categorizing love is almost for me a process of my own unlearning as I'm going through the book. Um, and she says, like, we spend a lifetime undoing the damage caused by cruelty, neglect, and all matter of lovelessness experienced in our families of origin and in relationships where we simply did not know what to do. Which is in Roman page 28. And then going on to say, to open our hearts more fully to love's power and grace, we must dare to acknowledge how little we know of love in both theory and practice. And sort of accepting that I still have so much to learn about love. More in my life, I did realize that love was more of a verb, but this idea that love is not instinctive and that you are just not loving someone right away, like it's a choice, that was such a profound moment for me, because then I thought of different moments in my life where I'm like, well, that made sense. Like, after having a child, you don't just like love this thing. Is controversial to say, but that's why so many women have a hard time adjusting to new things. But anyway, that really struck me, to know that love is a choice and we don't know as much about it. So I'm sort of figuring out myself in this book and processing where I am in terms of love, for my kids, for my partner, and for myself.
Hi everyone. I'm also new to the book club. I'm actually in Texas, but I really wanted to read this book, so I wanted to join. But I also appreciated, sorry, can everyone hear me? I also appreciated that how she like wants to define love and how she like wants there to be a rubric. And like the day after I picked the book up, I was actually listening to Lauryn Hill, Miseducation, where like the kids in like the school are defining love and like saying what it means to them and how they all had like different definitions. And I was like, that's crazy, because like they already have like different ideas of love so young. And when we have different definitions and there's no rubric, like it's easy to misconstrue different things, like infatuation or abuse as love. And so I agree that there should be a rubric, and like I really appreciated that she defined it so clearly. And yeah.
To piggyback off of what you just said, especially when you spoke about the kids, and we're talking about this rubric, what love is. I'm on page 6 where she just clearly states love and abuse cannot coexist. And it needs to be repeated. It needs to be in a classrooms everywhere. It needs to be on subways, just everywhere, because I think oftentimes, so many people stay in abusive relationship on that notion of he loves me or she loves me or they love me, or even parents, right? When she's talking about this definition of love in the section, when she's talking about how, of punishment and beatings and what that looks like, right? And I'm doing this because I love you. And I think there is some of that unlearning of cultural, generational that has to happen. that we really look to that notion and unlearn and really soak in that love and abuse can't flow. I think it's just oil and water won't mix. Love and abuse cannot coexist, and we just need to remind ourselves, our children, our partners, and everyone of that.
And also, I'd like to build on that, go to page 7, and where she talks about we should basically not confuse care with love.
Yes.
Just
Yes.
because you are clothed and fed and, you know, he may wash the dishes for me every other day, that, oh yeah, he loves me. That is not necessarily the case.
That's very prevalent too within the book Sula by Toni Morrison. She has the mother and daughter have this conversation where they talk about, she says, Mama, did you love me? And she said, you know, did you eat every day? Did you, you know,
Right.
were you clothed? Were you fed? Like, you know, I was out here with 3 lima beans, right? Like, and I fed you and your siblings. And so this idea that, you know, I think it's the precision of language that Hooks uses is extremely important, because we tend to mince words and use words very lightly. And say that you love somebody versus versus caring, which I do agree, that really stuck out for me, even as I reflect on my own parenting, looking at what does it mean to provide things, right, versus providing affection and really lending to your spiritual growth, as she talks about. So that really stuck out for me as well.
That's also mentioned in Fences, but when Denzel and his son, you know, you never loved me. Love you. I didn't need to love you. You know, I took care of you, and it's just not the same thing.
Yep. To that point in chapter 2, she goes on to talk about, like, basically what folks mentioned before, particularly LaToya, that idea of like childhood and love, and how do those two things coexist together. And my favorite part in chapter 2 is when she gets toward the end. It's page 26, 27, 28. She starts talking about like TV shows and shit. And she starts saying how we, like, mad people compare, or, you know, you watch a TV show like Leave It to Beaver or Home Alone, right? And we see these like different familial components and dynamics, and we often crave and we go, oh, that's what a good dad does, or that's what a good mom does. And she talks about how the reality was that those situations weren't utopian, they weren't ideal. Like, it took a lot of critical assessment on the part of the adult to like give love. And I also love that Bell Hooks talks about how, particularly I would say like in a Black and brown community, we see single parenthood in this particular way, and how like the tool and the keys that so many members of our communities also serve as our parents, right? And I think about, as someone who grew up as a single parent who was the eldest child, how that wasn't around for me, but I had to kind of be the other parent, right? And what does that look like when you have other members in your community trying to show love, be in love, and then you grow up and you're like, wait a minute, I've been trying to play this parent role of love for so long, I don't even know what that looks like for me, right? So that was really, really strong for me.
If I might interject there, I grew up, I was the elder child. My mom was single mother. I was the dad, I was the mom, I was the auntie, I was grandma, I was everybody for my sisters. So this idea of the term dysfunction and how it's so distinct in defining what love is and what dysfunctional families look like. You know, I saw a post the other day on Mother's Day, someone who's kind of idealistic in their social media platform, because they're kind of like a social media, you know, icon or whatever. They're like, Latina mothers are always there for the children. I want to be like, oh, boo, no, this is idealistic. They're not all there for us. You know, this is idealistic, and that all Latina mothers are warm, like, I love you, like, I want to be your mom. Like, no, that's not what was my reality. So this idea of dysfunction to describe my immigrant family who came here, and I didn't want it to be so disrespectful, because they're Roman Catholic, and I don't know who can identify with having this religion dogma and that you have to honor your parents no matter what. And an aspect came in when I was really young, and I saw that I don't want to judge them because they're not perfect, they're not there for me, they don't love me, but they do provide, they do these things, they take me to church, they feed me, they take me to school, they do all of this. But this, we need to degunk this idea that of idealism of people, this idealism of parents, this idealism of the stereotype of Latina women or Latina mothers, or any kind of mother really, that they're going to be this mother. Like, no one assumes the role of mother, even if they're pregnant, even if they have a child. That doesn't make you a mother. And I don't want to down anybody who is a mother, because I'm not a mother, but I've been in the role of being a mother, being a nurturing woman, being someone who doesn't called upon to be in that role. So this idea of the term dysfunction was so prevalent in here that I had to put the book down and just like think, because I was like, this shook me. This book is shaking me right now. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
I'd like to offer something to the space. I'm Brandon. Like, there's a lot of talk, right, about, and I get bell hooks when she says, and I agree with her when she says, like, love and abuse cannot exist. So which one are you choosing, right? I get that. However, I just want to invite this to the space. Can one, like, craft a love language or navigate any type of love map without knowing what the opposite is? The opposite being abuse?
Exactly, that's what I was thinking. Like, what if you have not had that experience of love, of what the ideal, the definition of love is, and you're just repeating what you know, thinking this is love?
But that's what,
same thing.
That's exactly what happens. But then I feel like on that same page, because you're right, we all come from different homes and we all come from different spaces. And when you don't know, you're going to repeat, as Mercy was saying, what you were taught. But that's why I think on page 10, Belle was speaking directly to me. And I was like, yes, this is me. When she goes, one pattern that made the practice of love especially difficult was my consistently choosing to be with the men who were emotionally wounded, who, while not that interested, were not that interested in being loving, even though they desired to be loved. And that's exactly what it is. You give what you sort of was received and how you were taught. And then when she said that, it's similar to what Bunny said. I had to put the book down because that was me. I was like, oh my God, like every time I'm like, why is this so hard for you? If you're dating someone or you're like, why is this sort of like your wounded pattern of what you were perceived as love, what you were taught is something so foreign to me. And I'm trying to like do something else and so it's just push pull and sort of like, we can't go back and undo what you learned, and I'm trying to show you this way, and it's difficult. Even this whole notion of like something as small as saying thank you. Like, I think if we're with a partner or something like that, it just shocked me. One time I had to say to someone like, did you even say thank you? Right? Like gratitude, but then also being that some people aren't raised in a home where consistent of words of like affirmations and thank you and I love you is consistently what they hear all the time. And so that whole notion of the question is, what is the definition of love? It's really a question you unpack with your partner when you meet people, because again, of that upbringing of, and exactly what you said, Brandon, of like, what if all you knew was abuse?
I agree with you, Latoya. I was thinking the same thing, and just the way I look for love and how I find love. And I just kind of grew up in like that strong, silent type, right? Like a man he's this way, or, you know what I mean? And just that, you know, like men don't show emotion, or that love is more of like a feminine thing. And even like I was looking at page 11 where she says, so many of us long for love, but lack the courage to take risks. Even though we are obsessed with the idea of love, the truth is that most of us live relatively decent, somewhat satisfying lives, even if we often feel that love is lacking. And that like really stood out for me also. Like in terms of like not being in a relationship, being like, you know, that's okay, you know, or you know, being in bad relationships and you know, rationalizing why that's okay. you know?
But also is that our work? Is that our emotional labor to take on? Like, take on your work to outgrow stuff and unlearn stuff. And like, I also like read another book that also touched on like that women check out self-help books more than men at like greater numbers. And it's like, we're working, we're moving, we're shaking, you know. And so should it be on us to like carry ourselves through that and also carry them too? Like, yes, like we all grew up in different households, but like a lot of times men and women will grow up in the same type of toxic household, and women will come out the other side, you know, ready to grow out of that. And men are like, well, I grew up in this, so shrug, you know? And so it's like, why does it have to be so one-sided as to like, women have to do our work and be okay with like the bare minimum? Because
so I have a question concerning that. I did not read the book, but I'm here and we all know a little bit about love, right? But I'm wondering, and I admit that I did not read, but here's the question that I'm posing to everyone who did read. And hopefully that will respond to the last question that was posed. Is there, at any point, is there a place where, sorry, that's my children, I'm about to turn the mic off. Is there a place where she talks about healing independently, doing self-healing so that you can unlearn those bad habits, unlearn what you're used to going to, and learning a different being in a different space mentally, emotionally, spiritually before going towards another relationship, because you will attract who you are. You will attract what is familiar to you. So she tapped on having to change yourself, going through a journey internally before taking that road with someone else.
You find it later on in later chapters of the book.
I think the whole book is posing that question, right? That's the whole point of the whole book. Like I think the entirety of the book
is about love and how to accept yourself and how to
right. That's the entirety of the book.
I read, this is my second or third reading of this book, and so I can tell you that that's what it's all about. About finding that love for yourself, finding other people, and finding the right kind of love. And for me, reading it now after having read it when it was first published, is seeing the growth in yourself.
Oh, yeah.
So I
Also,
started
like,
reading it. I'm reading preface, the beginnings, except the first 3 chapters, and seeing that from the last time I read it years ago to now, I have seen the growth in myself and what love looks like for me. So once you start reading the book and going further into the book, you'll start seeing that it's a handbook on how to deal and how to be in the world.
Yeah.
And specifically speaking, she does have like one of the definitions that she doesn't speak of like coming from herself, but that she quotes is that love is the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another spiritual growth. And so it is like there is that emphasis that it should be towards yourself as well. And then she goes on page 5 to say outright, love is a combination of care, affection, recognition, respect, commitment, trust, and honest, open communication. And so, yes, you should have those with other people. But I mean, first and foremost, if you're ever gonna, I mean, what does everybody say? Like, she talks about it in later chapters, but she says like, you're never gonna, like, nobody's ever gonna love you if you don't learn how to love yourself. And like, she takes that and twists it in a different way. I can't find the exact quote, but I mean, to an extent, it's just like you do have to learn how to show yourself all of that stuff, not only to be able to receive it from somebody else, but in order to give it to somebody else. Because if you've never been given that, then how do you know how to give it yourself?
Yeah, I wondered because primarily the comments have been about love towards other people or love we received prior to getting with other people. So I did wonder, well, does she talk about self-love? You know, so that's why I'm asking, because so far the comments, that's what I've been hearing. And it's just wonderful that she does tap on that, because that's primary before anything else. So thank you. I appreciate that.
I think naturally that's how we relate to people too. When it's very, well, I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but fuck it, let's ride the wave. I would say that it's rare that internally you're able to go, oh shit, like my level of self-love today, I'm doing good, I'm doing bad. It's easier when you're in relationship to other people. If the person you love is mad at you, if you're in a fight, if they're like, you know what, fuck it, I don't love you anymore. It's easier to go, oh shit, I have less love, right? I have less of it than I had 20 minutes ago. So I think that's also the point. Like, yes, self-love is there, but we recognize and we have doubts when it comes to our relationships to other people. That's when we tend to go inward and go, oh shit, like, what am I demanding of myself? What am I asking of myself, right? As humans, we don't really know what's happening until you're in it with someone else or in your relationships. And I don't even mean romantically, I mean friendships, platonically, neighborly love, familial, right? Like all of these ways in which we have to coexist. So I think in book club, we can assume when someone's saying, well, I don't know, maybe we shouldn't assume, but can we now assume that when we talk about like the various relationships, that Bell Hooks is really trying to encompass all of it. She's not just saying, what do you want in your romantic life? What do you want in your personal life? What do you want in your spiritual life? How is love the greater embodiment of all these different facets, you know?
Yeah, I think she kind
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think she's also talking about the intersectionality, the connectedness of it all, right? Like that foundation of love being it. But there's so many different seasons or parts of a series that ultimately boil down to this thing of love. That there's somewhere that she says there's no one ingredient. You need a mixture of all of these ingredients. And then it made me think of like cooking. If you only use one ingredient all the time, you're gonna get tired of that, right? But when you start throwing in different sazones and different things to the mixture, it's really when you grow and are able to find what that love is to you, what that definition is to you, and how you can see yourself and other people in it.
Yeah, I think she's making a general comment, like in the introduction and in the preface in general, she really makes it a point to describe how our society has lost the concept of love. So in no point in the book, I don't think she focuses on self-love, like especially with the definition given on page 4. I think she wants us to understand that like the whole practice of love isn't like just a one and only type of thing. Like we need each other in society in order to practice this love and for it to be viable. And she really challenges, I think, especially us as women, because even like this is my second time reading through the book, she really challenges like we think we know that we're loving, we think the way we practice love is like what it is, and we often find ourselves like I've done it plenty of times, like I'm more loving than my male counterparts, when that's just basically not true. Because like several times along in the book, like even within these first 2 chapters, I'm just like, oh, I've been doing it all wrong. like I don't have it together as much as I thought I did. And so I've really appreciated her from that standpoint to really just like challenge everyone. Like even as women, we don't have it together. And someone mentioned before, like the whole postpartum thing, like we have to like break down these notions where we think that we instinctively have this thing intact and we don't. So yeah.
Blanche, you spoke life into me right there. I think that's the awareness or the realization as I continue to read about love, because I find I'm so loving, I'm the most amazing mom and affectionate, but I realize like with my partner, sometimes, you know, we talk about feedback, like his feedback to me is all these things, right? And when I thought about those ingredients, I'm like, well, there's certain things missing in this cake. And I'm expecting a love from you that we fantasize about. I also love that she really puts that on paper, that we fantasize about this idea of love, especially through the lens of a man that's writing it, right? But I realized the self-awareness of how can, like, I'm expecting you to love me in this way, but I am not showing you trust. I'm not showing you respect. I'm not showing you all of these actionable things that are all encompassing of love. It's not just affection and care. And then I also backtrack to the awareness and also the acknowledgement of the dysfunction of what love I received as a child, what love I received growing up, and how that also has created for me what love is. Like I thought in 17, it says, the first sentence, we learn about love in childhood. Whether our homes are happy or troubled, our families functional or dysfunctional, is the origin school of love. Like, what did I learn from my single mom doing the best that she could, navigating abusive relationship and trying to, like, you know, be successful in this world? Like, yes, you spoke so much life into me, because that awareness, I realized we fantasize about this idea of love, but there's all these ingredients that if you don't have the mixture, then your cake is not gonna bake, if that makes sense. Somebody brought up food somewhere. So I'm gonna relate it to food.
Yeah, I also like how she really breaks down kind of the gender roles. Like in the intro, she references that book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and then again on page 11 and 12. And she says, this type of literature is popular because it does not demand a change in fixed ways of thinking about gender roles, culture, or love. You know, rather than sharing strategies that would help us become more loving, it actually encourages us to adapt to circumstances where love is lacking. I mean, so I like how she's really saying, you know, it's not true that men and women are just so different we can't speak the same language. You know, we can have those expectations of our partners and not feel, you know, we have to have a certain role, but we can speak the same language. And a lot of that's due to this society, you know, and genderizing.
And being very hetero about shit, right? Because we're very man, woman, man, woman.
Exactly.
That's like the most basic way that people are relating to each other, you know? I co-sign with what you're saying, Alyssa. I see you.
Most of those books, the Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, they actually keep us like in a boxing ring where we're each on every corner and we're ready with gloves to fight you however it is that we're going to fight you. Either we're going to fight clean or we're going to fight dirty, but we're going to fight, versus having us be like a dance where we're going to dance together simultaneously. You go forward, I go back. So it keeps us in that way, and we have to choose, are we going to fight in the boxing ring or are we going to dance on the ballroom?
I agree, Brenda. I think, you know, it has to be a bit of push and pull. We have to give people a chance to adapt in a way when we express how we want to be loved or what we felt was not loving. And I think sometimes we can be super rigid about, like, well, this person did this and I need to now put up my walls. I need to put up my boundaries because it's not safe. And like, they'll never change. And sometimes we make people, we read people as having a fixed mindset. So I think that in our pursuit of love or our pursuit of understanding love, we need to not hold people to a moral standard that we can't attain. We're all trying to be more loving. Obviously, we're all here Tuesday night trying to just share ideas, which has been so nourishing and so great. There's so many great ideas being thrown around, but until we really sit down in our own stuff and realize, wow, the people that are in my life give me so much grace, give me so much room to adapt and change my mind. And yeah, I think that is like, that is what love is, right? Like, I don't have children, but I assume that, you know, children, there's a time when a child may say something to a mother or a father that literally breaks their heart in two. But for some people, it'll be like, listen, this is, I watched you. I watched you grow. I know that what you're saying right now is not loving. It doesn't make me feel good, but I know that there's better in you. So I think, you know, we have to give people a chance to grow up in love or evolve in love as we also evolve, and change their mind about what they need, because we know different seasons affords you with, you know, with what you need for that particular season.
I think that's what they call unconditional love, is when you can do that. And then we tend to, I think it's easier for us to do it with our children than it may be for us to do it with our partner. I think we have the expectation that our kids are going to piss us off at some point. And, you know, it's like you said, it's okay because they're our kids. But I think it's different if it comes from your partner, because it carries a lot more baggage. It carries, you know, you didn't do the dishes yesterday. It carries something else. So I think part of what she's trying to remind us is, A, we can't give what we don't have, and B, that we all need to be a little bit more unconditionally loving.
What are your Sorry, I was just going to say I read this book at a time in my life where I think I was trying to understand love about myself. And I think that you can, you know, from the question that happened earlier about, is there any talk about self-love? And I really think it's so important, and it was really important for me at the time I was reading it, and now I'm reading it again, to explore and challenge myself about how I'm loving myself. And seeing all those facets of love and that definition of love opened my eyes up to see that even with myself, I'm not that kind, and I'm not that giving, and I'm not that forgiving. And so how can I actually do that with someone else if I won't even do it with myself? And so I mean, this book was like world altering for me. And it still is, because it is a daily practice, and it's actually a daily struggle. Like, it's like, wow, I really have to strive to unlearn some of the hurt from the past, but also learn how to encompass all of these things in love. Because I didn't know, you know, before reading this book, that love was more than care, or love was more than affection. You know, those were the things I was seeking, and those were the things I was giving, but there's so much more involved in it. And that's daily work on myself too, that I have to also work on. So I just wanted to put that out there.
And speaking on that, like, so much more, there are these two parts where she talks about self-assertiveness and self-responsibility that were really important for me, because that's self-advocacy right there. Self-advocacy is so, like, such an important part of self-love, because I think earlier, or maybe later on, she talks about when we love rightly, we know that the rightful response to cruelty and abuse is to take yourself out of harm's way. And that's that self-assertiveness, that's that self-responsibility. And without, like, that for me was the most important thing from learning this book, I think.
And I'll add to that, being radically honest. And I think most of the time, like, people don't think that those pieces go together. If you're sitting there and you're doing, as you said, being self-assertive and thinking about that and being radically honest with yourself and with others, and once you can do that, then you have all the pieces you need for yourself to figure out sort of like that roadmap and what does that look like. But with those pieces that you said, being self-assertive and advocating and being radically honest, I just feel like those are parts of pieces that I've just been working on with myself. And I found myself stopping, like, stop. Are you being radically honest with yourself? Are you being radically honest with this? Are you being radically honest with that? Once you can answer those questions for yourself, then you can just, like, move. I just feel like
that line where she goes, "You must let the lies go." Like, I put that in bold in my notes, repeated it over and over and over again. You must let the lies go. And they're lies that you don't even realize. And she's talking about the patriarchy, but the patriarchy affects all of us.
You heard, Ron? No, I'm playing.
You got jokes.
I'd like to piggyback off what LaToya just said. Because this is tricky for me, right? Because when you're talking about radical honesty, you can have it with yourself as much as you want. However, I think where the breaking point comes from, or just kind of where the stickiness in that comes from, is like the interpersonal relationships when radical honesty is introduced in one person's life and not the other. So now you have these massive expectations, and people often maybe just don't meet up to them. And then you're mad at them for not being exactly who you expected them to be. I got a lot of that out of the book. I remember the first time I read it, because it was like, you can be as radically honest as you want with yourself, but if the people around you, if you don't change everything, it's not an inward thing, it is also an outward thing, right? Everything around you needs to be radically honest, including the people. And if they're not, it's gonna self-destruct.
But it's that self-acceptance also of, you have to meet people where they are and accept them that where they are. And like, as much as you would want something else from them, if that's where they are, that's where they are. Now your decision, you want to participate in that. And then that's your action. And it's up to you, but it's not your job to sit there and change and to mother someone or to nurture someone. That's their work. And so it's up to you in that radical honesty to be like, you know what? I see you for what you are. I'm gonna love you from this distance back here. I can help you, but it's not my job to fix you.
I also think that's for getting comfortable with ambiguity, right? So like, you can do this work on yourself, right? You can get to a certain place. You can examine what's going on with your childhood and your upbringing and what brought you here today. And you can look to the past and see, like, you know, for my example, I got a lot of care, but not as much love. But that doesn't mean that I don't love my parents, and doesn't mean that within their limited scope of ability, they didn't love me. But their definition of love was much smaller than the definition of love that I have right now. And I think moving in the present and looking into the future, it's having to be comfortable with the in-between that all of us are in, because we're experiencing this in relationship. Like, you explore this, you come to understand yourself, you come to work on these things with other people, and it's going to be a push and pull, it's going to be a back and forth, and it's going to be both kind of good and kind of bad and kind of meh and kind of a lot of things at the same time. And the other thing that I want to throw out to the group is related actually to Brandon's initial question about how do you learn these things if you only know one side of it, how, you know, that piece of it. At least in the first section, and I haven't read this book since literally 2002, besides the parts that I just reread for tonight. There are some defenses that we learn to get through abuse, to get through neglect, to get through whatever we've had to get through, that are actually adaptive for a reason. Like, we may never be able to let go of that one thing that keeps us from one aspect of one definition of love, because that's how we got through something, and it is kind of useful. So even for ourselves, even as we're trying to move to this ideal, there's going to be some like ambiguous something that's just not meeting all 7 parts of the definition in full, because we're fully human.
And another thing that she talks about is like the definition of like perfect, like the verb to perfect, the will to refine, making perfect love, the will to refine that love. And so perfect love isn't love that perfectly encapsulates all of those aspects, but it's that will and that intention, that action of continuously trying to be better, continuously trying to nurture your own and somebody else's spiritual growth.
Yeah, we don't get to define that. We don't get to define that timeline, but we do get to decide whether we're going to participate in it.
And even I typed in the chat, like, just thinking about love in a different way, because also even like reading the book, I know, I think Bell Hooks says, you know, when you ask children about love, they say it's like a good feeling, or, you know, it's when you eat something, have something to eat that you really like. On page, like, especially it's your favorite, they will say, my mommy loves me because she takes care of me and helps me to do everything. And that love has to do with just hugs and kisses and being sweet and cuddly. And that the notion of love is about getting what one wants. And so it's really difficult to think of it in a different way. You just start changing your thinking about love. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I wanna offer a book that I read. It's called The Spirit of Intimacy, and it's ancient African teachings in the ways of relationships. And it really helped me when I was trying to, I'm always thinking about like how I'm showing up in love for people, but basically it talks about how the Western world identifies love in this very linear 1-to-1 ratio, but ancient African society talks about the fact that we have many mothers and we have many fathers, and even in the confines of a relationship, when two people decide to join together, if that's what they decide, that they have the support of the community. And it's just a really great read. I'm gonna type it in the chat so you guys can, it's like $11 on Amazon.
That book is dope.
Yes.
Mainly too because it really talks about, when talking about community, it really discusses too that your love for another person is also highly dependent on that community, right? Like if you get into an argument with your mate, like that whole community has to come around and try to heal and repair that relationship. So it's the same thing that you think about when you get married, when you bring all these people into your life and bear witness to something that you have like given yourself, you've given yourself to this other person. Your idea is that every single person who's attending this ceremony is someone I can go to if my shit start falling apart. You know what I mean? And that's like one of the things I really appreciated about that book. And I hope like some like deeper conversation around community love and community healing, because that you have to go to your people when shit is sort of like not where it needs to be, right? It's like we also think we can heal everything alone, and that's how we need to do our work. And our work sometimes is not only by ourselves. You know what I mean? It's like, it's fluid. It's like sometimes I'm reflecting by myself, sometimes I'm reflecting with my mate, and sometimes I'm reflecting with my homegirls and my community, my family, and all those things need to be happening simultaneously. So I love that.
She actually talks about that in the introduction, where she says that she went to her friends and her friends were like, girl, get a therapist. Right. Like, and it's that idea that sometimes you want to share like what's happening in your intimate relationship with your friends, but then sometimes you feel like you're a burden to your friends because you're always coming to them for relationship advice or things of that nature. And sometimes you don't have a therapist. Sometimes you can't go to family, and so sometimes like one person becomes that go-to individual that you talk about your relationship with, but it feels more like a burden than a community. She talks about that in like the introduction briefly.
And touching on this as well, and also thinking about Brandon's original question, she has a point where she says satisfying relationships are like, can serve as a blueprint for like behavior that you want in relationships, like romantic relationships or just other relationships in general, which was also really important to me. She talks about like, we trust that friends want like have our best interest in mind and will give us critique and whatever with our best interest in mind. And so thinking about community and also thinking about Brandon's original question, like looking to the satisfying relationships that already exist in your life and seeing like what aspects of that do you like and what aspects could you maybe do without. You can start to like map out a blueprint for yourself for like what your ideal form of love to receive would be.
It's interesting because when I started reading this book and I started thinking about the first time I was introduced to love and the first time I learned love, I realized that it was through my friendships. It was through my adolescent relationships. The very first best friend that I had in high school, we were like extremely close, almost to a point that looking back, it was kind of unhealthy. Like I went to this person for every form of validation, every affirmation, everything that I needed in my life, I got from that person. And that relationship eventually took its course, life took its course, and we are still in each other's lives, but not in the same way. And so when I'm reading these definitions of love and thinking of how she talks about love being defined in the way it happens in interpersonal relationships or like romantic relationships, I think of how my experience and
introduction to love was completely different, and it was just in the form of friendships. And I think about books like Sula, where we read how intimate adolescent relationships can be, especially between teenage girls, and how they kind of lean on each other for affirmations and love and emotional support that they're supposed to be getting from their parents or their mothers. And so as I continue to read this book, I am leaning less towards thinking about how I navigate love in like my romantic relationships, because that's not as important to me in my life right now. It's more so in how I navigate love in terms of my friendships. Because I think the women in my life who support me and who have been here for me and watch me grow, that type of love and support is more important to me, and that type of love and support feels more at home and more natural for me. And I guess after sharing that, my question is, did anyone start thinking of love and start learning love outside of interpersonal relationships and family relationships? Was there another way that you were introduced to love other than what was mentioned in the first 2 chapters so far?
Yeah, someone said television. I agree. Television, like movies, TV, books. That was because I don't remember any adults in my life. I don't remember looking at any adults in my life and being like, oh, they look like they're in love. But even my grandparents who were together, they were just holding it down. I don't know if folks were really in love, you know what I mean? So it was like TV, music, listening to music, sound, being like, oh, God, Aretha, Anita, this must be love. You know what I mean? Like stuff like that. And I'm like serious.
For me, it was also like TV for examples. But as for like outside people who made me feel love, it was definitely my teachers. Like I would stay after school extra because like they just showed me so much like love and affirmation. And that's what made me love going to school, and then like ended up taking me through university, was because like I was so like they gave me so much special attention that like I didn't get that at home. So like I got it at school, and like that's how I learned to love learning. And like so yeah, I also, that's why like I feel like teachers are such a like, that's where I feel like now, like during this time, it's showing us like how much teachers do. Like for people who didn't already have an appreciation for teachers, like teachers do so much. And like some teachers do the bare minimum, unfortunately, but a lot of them like show these kids love that they don't get in other places. And like that's really important.
Yeah, and Bell Hooks actually uses some interesting examples when she's talking about TV, like Leave It to Beaver. And I mean, those are shows that I always had thought were so problematic because they're just, you know, naive and unrealistic. And but she was saying, I think it's on like page 29 or 30, that, you know, actually people thought they're realistic because, you know, just that model of kind of a loving family may seem unrealistic to most people, but they were actually showing just examples of conflict resolution and problem solving. And so it's just interesting because I wouldn't have thought of those shows in a positive light.
I usually thought of love in like TVs, like telenovelas. So it was always very like spicy. Like, you know, it was like if you weren't getting into an argument and slamming the door or throwing a plate, then it wasn't love, right? So, you know, that for me, you know how it is, Brenda. I see you laughing, right? Because you be like, estúpido, you know, like, and then it's just, for me, that was love, right? That if I didn't have that friction, then I was like, you clearly don't care about me. Because if you cared about me, then you would fight with me to the death, you know? And even in romance or body strippers, like I like to call them, that love where he's like ravaging her. And, you know, like, it's always very prevalent in my mind. Like, that's what I discovered love was, like fighting. If I'm fighting for you, then I love you. If I don't say nothing to you, then I don't care a dime about you, a dime. So, you know, that's what love is. Hi, my name is Marta. I'll be here every week.
Yeah, I think also on the same note, I remember getting my first impressions of love through music. And it was always about, love had to be accompanied with suffering, pain, agony. Like you have to suffer for love. Like it has to be like this very dramatic thing.
Mary J. Blige.
All of that, right? And then when I went into these relationships with other people, I was expecting the same things. Like we need to suffer. Like this needs to be painful in order for me to really know that I'm in a loving, quote unquote, loving relationship. And it's so crazy how those things kind of get printed on your mind about what love is. Yeah.
I like that, Sarada. I like that. I'm like Edward Cullen.
Edward Cullen. Yeah. What is that?
Who said? Okay, Edward Cullen is the you see me getting defensive, right, Bunny? Okay, Edward Cullen. I don't even ask me.
It's a Twilight shit, right?
Yes, it's that Twilight shit. It is exactly. He is like so in depth. He's like, I will die to be with you. I will burn to death to be with you. Like, that's love for me. If it's not painful, I don't want it. I don't want it.
Marta, right now, because you're gonna kill me, and I'm good. So.
Marta, your grown self, you still think that way?
Of course I do. What do you mean? This is how I perceive love. Like, am I trying to evolve? Absolutely. But let's just be real. Like, at the core of who I am and how I learn to love, that is what I like. Like, if I don't have that, then I'm just like, me. If did anyone watch Sex in the City where the guy was being so nice to her and she was like, ew, like, why are you being so flowers? How dare you? But Big, that was the love of her life. That is who she married. That's love. Yes. So
we need an extra addition to the book club just to talk about how toxic Mr. Big was. That's what we need to talk about.
Agreed.
He's not goals. Mr. Big is not goals. And hers
not at all.
Like, F Mr. Big, he's awful. He kept coming back. And there's an episode where, sorry to caveat, but she gives him a speech and she's like, you don't love me, you're awful. And they should have ended the episode. They should have ended the season, ended everything right there, where she walks away from him and she's in her fancy dress. And that is the love that we deserve. Leaving. That's what Bell Hooks wants for us.
That's what Bell Hooks wants.
Leave.
Yes.
That's what Bell Hooks wants, is for us to leave Mr. Biggs on the concrete looking stupid, and that's what they deserve. So that's what Bell Hooks wants for us.
I'm Carrie Bradshaw. I'm in the place looking around like, why didn't he get his shit together? Like, I need the space. Get your shit together, sir, because I love you. Don't you fucking get it? Like, I'll deal with all of your shit. But yes, you're right. Absolutely. Like, Bell Hooks is like, no, sis. There's so much more out there than that.
So clearly we need a book on trauma bonds next, after Bell Hooks, to do some unlearning.
Is it just me, or is it like when you first meet someone, like you see them with clear eyes and you're like, yeah, no, this is not the move. But because you like, sometimes you're bored, or like you are like, well, this is, maybe I'm going to give it a try, XYZ. And then all of a sudden you're into something that you would have never been into if you would have just rejected it in the first place. And I think as women, we need to just like shut it down from the beginning. Like, it's nothing personal. You're a great person, but you're just not good for me. Because then you end up chasing, Sean for the next 8 years. And you didn't even like Sean because he had a crooked tooth. He didn't have no job. He said his baby mama was crazy. He told you that, he told you who he was. He did not lie. I'm sorry if I'm coming at everybody, because I'm coming at myself.
I thought you were going to say months. I didn't think you were going to say 8 years.
Struggle love is real, okay? You be in it like, like you're doing a bit.
You want it in the first place. And I think as women, we have to take ownership that we are not victims all of the time. Sometimes we step into something and it don't smell good, and then we like, oh my gosh, I smelled that. Like, but we put ourselves, we allow ourselves to be distracted when we know that that's not what we desired initially.
And that just goes back to that self-responsibility and that radical honesty with yourself.
Also, if you didn't have good examples.
Thank you for bringing us back, because we were deviating real.
Because radical honesty allows you to, you said them with clear eyes, you said? I don't know, you said
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
Like radical honesty lets you look at someone with clear eyes and go, oh no, clearly this ain't for me. Like, let me get out of here. You know what I mean? Like that's exactly, there's not a step further you need to go. Like that's literally, that's
I also think it's
But a lot of
important to
us,
name.
oh, sorry.
I also think it's important to name like the toxicity within us.
Yeah.
Like this book, I think relationship, love, you know, we can all have those stories, right? But I think that mostly the way I'm connecting to bell hooks is love of self.
Yeah.
And then also how the love of self for me, how that's influenced the love for my children and the way that I love them, right? And the examples that I had. And I can identify, or, you know what was crazy? That when reading this book, and I started to read that chapter about childhood, I really had a hard time identifying the dysfunction in my family or within my mom. Like, I really had a hard time accepting that. And I still have a hard time accepting that. And I think that's why I didn't read the chapter fully, because I tried to be open-minded to really understand the dysfunction of the ways in which love was shown to me by a mother who was doing the best that she could, right? But also understanding how that has now influenced my own mothering, and how some of the dysfunction and toxicity and toxic behavior has sort of seeped into now my kids' love and my love. And that's something that I'm grappling with as I read this text, because it's left such a note in my mouth of wanting to accept it, but almost like she talks about that too, like this turmoil, like the acceptance of the dysfunction, the acceptance that your love was not full, that your love was not great, that your love was not affirming, which is why I talk bad to myself, why I self-deprecate, why I get anxious to step up and be courageous, right? Because that's the love that I knew. But anyway, I think in sort of navigating this, the acceptance of the dysfunction, and then also knowing how it seeped into my own toxicity, is something that I'm sort of working through with this text.
Yeah, but if you're radically honest with yourself, what happens is what you know as your life almost crumbles. Like everything that you have built or your family has built, if you're that honest, it almost feels like it's not real. And since you've lived it, somebody telling you that it's not real, it hurts. So it's hard for you to really accept that. So sometimes we rather just live in that fantasy of it and accept it, and maybe look at it and as an outward thing versus an inward, because we lived it for 20 something, 30 something, 40 something years. So it's really hard to be that honest with our past.
One thing that really helped me when I was reading about, like, and it wasn't just that chapter, like she kind of started from jump. She was like, let's talk about parents. And I was like, wait, hold up. But like one thing that really helped me was that later on she talks about forgiveness, and how forgiveness allows us to see each other as like people. It contributes to knowing oneself and others as potentially powerful people who can choose to lovingly create. And so like, yes, we can be radically honest and we can say, okay, we can repeat all those things. Abuse undermines affection. Abuse and love cannot coexist. We can repeat all those things, but then we can also come back and soften it with this, okay, forgiveness contributes to us knowing ourselves and each other as people who can change, as people who can do better. So like, yes, you did the best you could and it wasn't exactly enough, but I forgive you, and now we can create something better, something more.
And sometimes, to say with Brenda, sometimes
we're gonna actually end on that last comment. It's 8:33. So usually before we wrap up the conversation, we take a collective breath together. to ground everything that we shared, to be in gratitude of everyone who showed up, shared themselves. I also want to take a moment to honor all the names that were said aloud and written down. Thank you so much for being here. And if this is available to you, you can take a collective breath before we sign off. I invite you to put your feet flat on the ground in front of you, if that's comfortable for you. You can put your hands on your lap or your hands on your belly and your heart, whatever feels comfortable to you. And we'll take one collective breath together before we see each other next week. Cool. So we inhale. And exhale. Thank you all so much. It's been amazing, amazing conversation. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you for hosting.
All of you for showing up for
Yeah,
yourself.
so
Next week. Have an
week.
amazing.
Y'all bring
rest of your
snacks
week,
and
everyone.
refreshments next week because, geez, like.